909 2024. Uh, the day before the leap day, or non leap day, I'm not sure how you count. I just finished A Good School by Richard Yates. It had been a while since I read it last, and I was holding my breath waiting to see if my internet didn't cut out because if it had, I would have had to start it all over again. This was the second time I started reading the last paragraphs, and I knew it would be like an hour and a half, at least an hour and a half of reading. So luckily, it didn't cut out because it was almost 2 hours because it was two chapters in the afterword. Um, I hadn't read this book. I'd say, I don't know, at least 5 years. It's been at least 5 years since I've read it, probably longer. Um, and in reading the afterword, the very personal afterword, it's extremely obvious that Richard Yates sees himself as the character of Bill Grove, um, which is very touching because obviously I think it's a very self-deprecating character, and it's at least an honest portrayal as who he was among his peers. When you're growing up, and whether you're in the same clusters of people or different clusters, if you're moving around, you're always going to be a certain ranking or a certain you're always going to play a certain role, and you don't know this before you go through with it. It just sort of becomes what it is. It's kind of part of the tribalism thing. Each person is a player in the play, and each player has a role. And if you don't fit in, you have to fit in somehow. And whatever it's going to be, whether it's going to be the kid that's picked on, or the kid that's a student, the president of the, you know, student council, or whatever it is, there has to be a definitive title to you. Otherwise, people don't know what to do with you. I think people need to know what to do with you than to not. If people don't know what to do with you, that makes them restless and uneasy, which is good if you're strong enough to realize that. But if you're young and you don't, you're either going to take a role, or a role is going to take on you. And so I think it was an important factor in this book for a character like Bill Grove, i.e. Richard, to assign himself eventually as editor-in-chief of a paper. And I liked one of the last passages about people telling him it doesn't matter what your role is. Nobody cares about this stupid thing. You're doing it for nothing. And I think it's meant to say, in a larger sense, they were right. It didn't mean anything. He was editor-in-chief of a paper nobody cared about. But that's not the point. To him, it was all that mattered, because to him, it was a role that he chose that was in line with his destiny. So it was everything to him, even if it was nothing to everybody else. And I think there's an important thing to note about how I think that's how people see themselves at certain points in time, that they're nothing to everybody, but they're everything to themselves. And I think that's a very important nail to nail down or stake the claim. Because as low as any one person feels about themselves, they still have to have a little like morsel within them to press on. And you do that because you know deep down that you matter and your existence matters. Even in, I'm going to go off the edges, off the rails here. Even in all of recorded history, even if you can't be found, you know that you existed at some point in time. And because you existed, it matters. And because you know that you existed, you matter. And that might be an oversimplification, but I really think there's something to it. So, to a character that's saying to another character, what are you doing this for? It doesn't mean anything. You're wasting your time. Da, da, da. Yeah, of course it doesn't, because that character isn't in the role that the other character is. The other character found a role that means something to themselves. So the other character that didn't has to strike at it. And I think in the on the ongoing quest to kind of figure this all out, there's that recurring theme of identity. People need to have a sense of self, not only to thrive, but to survive in the world. And even if it isn't as impactful as they would want it to be, if they at least carved out something for themselves, it's part of the surviving. And that's very touching to read from Richard as he's trying to make peace with his past, or comb over his past and not analyze it, but not ruminate on it, not mull over it, but not appreciate it, acknowledge it, and let himself explain to himself what it meant to him and what it meant to his life from when he made the decision to take over a school paper, and how that transcended to his role of a writer. It's very important. Even if he was nothing else, because he makes it seem to be like he was really not much else at school. And that's kind of the devastating part of it is I can't speak in definitive sentences. That's kind of the devastating part of when you choose an identity. You're forgoing a lot of other things that you aren't. Like there's kind of a safety, but there's also a kind of damnation in knowing that, well, if you choose this, then you can't be that. And it doesn't have to be that way, but all your little idiosyncrasies and all your little traits and faults and whatever that you filter through your choice that you've chosen will kind of determine who you are. You'll determine who you are, but your very nature, that the things you do subconsciously and the things that you think you can control but you can't, will also decide. So you've got all these things running concurrent with either the choice you made or the choice that's been made for you in spelling out who you are. And sometimes that's a lifelong fight, but it's a necessary one, because if you don't make an identity for yourself, you're going to lead a very colorless life. You're going to live a very passive life. And I've seen it in a lot of people. A lot of people don't know who they are. And to be fair, I think a lot of people, it takes people a long time. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn who you are. But if you embrace that way, if you embrace knowing who you are and knowing how important that is and how it affects you and how it affects everybody in your life or the people around you, and the more you take it on, the healthier the choice is. I had forgotten. It's weird. I didn't forget about the passage about meeting Miss Hooper and how awful she was, but I did forget about the last passage where Mr. Driscoll goes to pick the boys up and how he was taking them back, knowing. Okay, how do I say this? He goes for bed check one night and he checks the beds and finds them empty, meaning the boys are all gone. And this is a little bit symbolic of the boys kind of having their last hurrah before scattering to the corners of the world or being taken in by the army to God only knows what kind of fates that they'll run into, a lot of which is most likely death. And in Mr. Driscoll's authority, he's coming face to face with the fact that he's interrupting their fun. He's interrupting their last euphoria and having to be quote unquote the man and bring them back to reality. And he gets not just upset, but like agonized over it. That this isn't a situation in which he wants to be the person to bring these babies to death. He was doing what he was part of his job, but he's realizing how close that reality will be for a lot of them. To say he let everything else fall apart inside him while he cried and cried. They sounded like children, because they were children. I rewatched this documentary or documentaries about Gore Vidal, and there are two very important factors in the documentaries where he talks about his grandfather, Senator T.P. Gore, who makes an impassioned speech that is not popular, saying to the mothers of babes, "I will not rob your cradles to feed the dogs of war." And then he talks about, I think, the love of his life, Jimmy Trimble, and how when he was in the service, he wrote home very bitter, very to the point, blunt truths about what he saw and what he felt as an 18-year-old thrown into a volcano. Like, I can't even imagine what it was like to be drafted and felt like you had no choice but to go to war and possibly to die. And in a book like this, a lot of the propaganda is working. Like, some of the boys are pumped to go into um, the services, and that's part of being a man. And you know, they're ready to go, they're ready to do it. And some of them are indifferent and they don't care, and they'll get their perks for having signed up, not if they make it back, but when they make it back, because they're sure they'll make it back. And then, of course, in like the epilogue, you have the little paragraphs about who died and when and what of, and how indifferent, not only how indifferent the world is, but how indifferent I think the government is, and but not how indifferent the people are. And to have a passage like, oh, what was one of the last passages I read about? Listen, though, don't look back too much, okay? You can drive yourself crazy that way. Having encountered a time like this, where you lived through something like this, and you knew people at one time, and then you learn that they died, not too long after, or not even that they died in the war at any point in time. It affects you. And then to be told, don't focus on the path, just go forward. It's like you're erasing them from existence. There was a girl from my graduating class that died, not in war, but she died. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. And I think of her from time to time, and how needless and unnecessary it was to have died. And there's no point to it. And I was going to say, I don't try to focus on the past too much, but I think everybody does look back, because you can't just live day to day and that be it. You've lived, all the time that you've lived have brought you up to the present. So how can you be so immersed in the present when you have all that backlog of time you've lived in the past? You don't need to dwell on it, but it affects you, because that's the time you've existed in. So, getting back to the book, yeah, it had been maybe 5 or so years since I'd read this, and again, it's very touching. I'm looking at the beginning of the book, and it says, "To the memory of my father," and the ending passage is about his father, and so Richard's looking in the past. He's thinking about his dad. In the autobiography, he talks a lot about his parents' divorce, and their divorce greatly affected him in his childhood, and therefore greatly affected him as an adult. And I think his father, and what happened to him in his life, all he wanted to do was be a tenor and sing, but for whatever reason it just didn't happen, and so he had to go make a living and be a General Electric employee, head of the Mazda lamp division. Nobody that exists wants to do a menial job, but has to pay the bills. And the sorrow that comes from not having dreams realized is something I think everybody relates to, and is can be upset by and mourns. And that will always be a running theme. There will always be the same themes uh, running through time as long as humanity exists. As long as any being with a conscious mind and can realize it exists, there will always be the same themes. One is of dreams never realized, another is finding your own identity in the sense of self. And this book, I'll be honest and admit, there's a lot of characters, and it's very easy for somebody like me to get lost in reading because he jumps from different characters to different characters. And honestly, like, the main players are like, well, Bill Grove's a main player, but he's also going through the different years as the boys are progressing through the school. So, of course, the players will change. But yeah, he talked about how there was a bullying incident where he was pinned and like by multiple boys and like masturbated, and it's like, how awful must that have been? And that is something that when that happens, I don't think you ever forget it. So he sits there with it for decades, and then he puts it in a book twice, not only once but twice, to where one of the main characters, Robert Driscoll, it happens to his son who he's like half disgusted with and half like disgusted that I think, if, and maybe I'm wrong, that it happened to. But then he has to be a father and assure his son that it's just a thing that happens. But a character like Bobby Driscoll is going to carry that thing through the rest of his life. What kind of like tribalism bully shit is it to where you capture like an individual, capture him, take him away, pin him down, and like jerk him off, and it's somehow like funny? I don't know. It's just, and he puts it twice in the book, and it clearly happened to him. And I wonder, like, over the decades, how often he thought about it, what he thought about it, and if he ever sought help from it, and how it affected him, because it affected him deeply. But and I was glad to see that the focus was kept on the boys, and that of course there were girls and talk of girls, and of course there should be. This is about a boys' school, and so there should be all these topics of what they encounter. And so of course you're going to have something like ranking and tribalism and authority and rebellion, but it's a different tone to other books of this nature. And it's hard to kind of articulate tonally what it is. I can't really describe it fully. I can't articulate it fully. But yeah, what am I trying to say? It's a good book, a good school. And like I said, it'd been a while since I've read it, and now I've read it twice, I think. So I'm going to put it back on the shelf with the other ones, and it'll sit for a while. I don't know when or if I'll pick it up again, but I'm glad to have read it on the channel, and hopefully if anybody's interested, they can listen and enjoy it, and hopefully I didn't mumble too much. And I feel bad I don't have too many thoughts to ruminate on it. The other novels I also haven't read for another 5 years, and I don't know if I'll read them all, but there's certainly another one I'd like to read. But I think a couple people sat in on the last reading, and I see somebody here. And if you're here, thanks. And if you were there, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope people enjoy these. I think people they click on them to follow along or out of curiosity sometimes, and whatever the reason, it's fine. I reading these again, it's helping me to get more comfortable with reading again. And I know reading aloud is kind of verboten, and it's kind of the mark of a slow reader. But and I am, but at least I'm reading, so it's more of a positive than a negative. But and hopefully I didn't do it too fast. Sometimes I read too fast, but whatever the case, if anybody listens, I hope they enjoy it. And I think that's really all I have to say. That aside from the fact that the passage about Jack Draper was incredibly depressing, a quote unquote crippled man trying to hang himself uh, after like the last like blow from his wife was, I forgot about that. And these are these incredibly moving. I'm ashamed to admit that I forgot about some of these passages, but I'm glad to have read them again to remember them. I don't know if I'll forget them again, but I wonder if he encountered a person like that in his life, where it was a known thing that. How do you deal with knowing somebody in your life? Okay. What if you knew of a married couple in your life where you knew they were married, but one of the spouses was having an affair and essentially is being cuckolded or queened or whatever the term is, and like it was just accepted and people went on as normal. And I'm sure that's a thing around the world, in the world, somewhere or somewheres in multiple places. But it's like, well, this one guy's fucking this other guy's wife, but he's not it just is what it is. And it's like, how would you even address that couple? And I think some people would feel they'd have to because they're in the same profession. So you have to act as if everything's normal. Meanwhile, this guy's wife is out, with this. I think the character was a student or a former student or something. Anyway, it's like I don't know how one would handle that, and and in the end, the guy tries to commit suicide and fails, and it's utterly depressing. But it's like I don't know how one would handle it in real life. I hope never to have acquaintances where that's a situation, because I really wouldn't know how to handle it. Even in a polyamorous relationship, if you wouldn't know a couple that's like a quadul, that's like 4 people or something, that would make me very uncomfortable, I think, because I don't know. There's too many feelings involved, I think, for it to be normal. I hope never to have to endure that. Anyway, this was a good book, and like I said before, I hope if anybody's listening to just listen to it or have it read to them or just for kicks or enjoyment, I hope they enjoy it. And who's ever listening, thank you for listening. And I think that's all I have to say. A Good School, good book by Richard Yates. And whatever the next one is I read will be for next time. I'm not sure which one I want to dive into next, but thanks for listening. Love you. Bye.